"Get on my horse, handsome cowboy," said the Apache woman who refused to let the cowboy die alone. The bullet was still in me when she found me. I know that because I could feel it, not the pain exactly, not by then, but the weight of it, the wrongness of it sitting there in the meat below my left shoulder, like a knot that had no business being in a man. 3 days I'd been moving through the canyon country with that in me, riding, stopping, riding again, pressing whatever I could tear from my shirt against it. By the third morning I wasn't riding anymore. I was leaning forward over the saddle horn with my eyes fixed on a spot of red dirt between my horse's ears, telling myself that if the horse kept going, I kept going, and that was the whole of my philosophy right then. The horse stopped. That's how it ended, not me deciding. The horse just stopped, put his big gray head down, and that was that. I slid off more than I stepped off. One boot caught the stirrup and I went down sideways and hit the ground on my right shoulder, which at least wasn't the one with the bullet in it. I lay on my back staring up at a sky the color of hammered tin, and I thought, well, this is a place to die as good as any. Better than some. There were some red rock walls maybe 200 yards off, their bases pooled with shadow even in the afternoon, and a smell of wet sage that told me there was water somewhere close. A man could do worse for his last view. I'd had a name once, a purpose, a reason to be in this particular piece of nowhere. All of that felt very far away, like something that had happened to a different person in a different year, and I couldn't work out why any of it should matter now. My name was Callum Voss. I was 47 years old, and I had been shot by a man whose name I still knew but would not say, not even now, not even to myself in the privacy of remembering, because saying a name gives it weight, and that man deserved none of mine. I'd been carrying a deed, a piece of paper that represented everything I'd worked 15 years to put together, a quarter section up near the canyon's head, good water rights, grass that came back every spring even in dry years. He'd wanted it. I hadn't given it to him. He'd had 3 men with him, and I'd had myself, which as negotiations go was not a strong position, and it had ended the way that kind of thing ends. One of those 3 men was dead. The others were not, but they were also not sure exactly where I'd gotten to, which was why I'd spent 3 days making my way through the broken country on the far side of the canyon, moving at angles, doubling back when I could manage it, trying to put enough ground and confusion between me and them that they'd give it up and go collect their fee some other way. I hadn't doubled back in about a day. I'd run out of the will for it. So I lay on my back on that red dirt, and I listened to my horse crop at something dry, and I thought about a lot of things that weren't useful to think about. My father's hands. The smell of the hardware store in the town I'd grown up in. A woman I'd been close to marrying once, back before everything turned into work and distance and years of not getting around to it. I'd thought about her a fair amount over those 3 days. Not with sadness, exactly. More like looking at something through a window from outside. There it is. You can see it plain, and there's just the glass between you and it, and the glass is the whole of your life's decisions. My horse raised his head. Not sharp, not the way they do when there's a predator smell. The slow raise, the ears tilted forward with something like interest. I turned my head on the dirt and I looked the direction he was looking. She came around a boulder the size of a small barn, on foot, leading a paint horse by a rope, not a bridle, and she stopped when she saw me the same instant I saw her. We looked at each other. She was Apache. I could tell that from 40 yards, the way she was dressed, the cut of her hair, the shape of the knife at her hip, the particular way she held herself, like the ground was hers and the rocks were hers and the air between us was still making up its mind. She was maybe 35, maybe older, hard to say. Her face was not a soft face, but it was not a hard one either. It was a specific face, the kind of face that has seen a number of things and has come to clear conclusions about most of them. She looked at me lying in the dirt. She looked at my horse. She looked back at me. Then she walked forward. I didn't move. There wasn't much moving left in me. She crouched beside me and she put one hand flat on my chest, not gentle, just placed it there like she was reading something. Her eyes went to my left shoulder where the shirt had gone dark and stiff. She said something in her own language, not to me, I thought, just to the situation, the way a person mutters when they find a fence broken or a pot boiled dry. Then she said, in English that was careful and complete, "You have been here long." It wasn't a question. "A while," I said. "The bullet is still inside." "Yes." She sat back on her heels and looked at me the way I might look at a piece of ground I was thinking about buying, measuring it, considering what it would require, deciding whether it was worth the investment. Then she stood up and went to her horse and came back with a bag made from something soft and brown, and she opened it and started laying things out on a flat rock beside me with a methodical calm that I found, I admit, somewhat alarming, because I knew what that kind of calm meant. It meant something was about to happen to me that I was not going to enjoy. "I have to take the bullet out," she said. "I figured. It will hurt." "I figured that too." She looked at me then with something in her expression I couldn't quite read. Not pity. Not quite, something more like assessment. "You are not afraid," she said. I thought about that. "I'm past afraid," I said. "I've been past afraid for a couple of days." She nodded as if that was an answer she could work with, and she went to work. I won't spend long on what happened next because there's no way to make it anything other than what it was, which was a woman digging a bullet out of my shoulder with a thin iron probe while I lay on the dirt of that canyon and stared at the sky and tried to be somewhere else in my head. I made some noise, not as much as I might have. She made none. She had a kind of complete concentration that I recognized. I'd seen it in good craftsmen, in the best horsemen I'd ever known, in the old farrier who'd shod my horses for 20 years without ever seeming to hurry. A person who has done a thing enough times that the doing of it takes all of them. She packed the wound with something that smelled green and sharp and hurt worse than the probe had, which I hadn't thought possible, and then she wrapped it with strips of cloth that she dampened with water from a bladder she'd had in her bag. Her hands were steady. When she tied off the wrapping she checked it twice, pressing gently along the edges, and then she sat back and looked at me again. "You need to be still," she said. "I need to get moving," I said. "There are men looking for." "I know," she said. That stopped me. "2 men," she said. "They came through the North Pass 2 days ago. They are asking about a man with a wound. I have been watching them." "Watching them?" "They do not know this country. They are riding the open ground and avoiding the canyon." A pause. "They will not find you here unless you move into the open." I looked at her for a long moment. She looked back, patient, waiting for me to finish whatever calculation I was doing. "Why are you helping me?" I said. She was quiet. She picked up the probe she'd used and wiped it clean on a cloth and put it back in her bag. Then she said, "I found a man dying in my country. That requires a decision." "And you decided?" "Yes." I didn't push it further than that. I was too tired to push anything. She went and gathered her paint horse and mine both and picketed them in the shadow of the red rock wall where there was some dry grass, and the water I'd smelled a seep. Not much, but enough. She built no fire. She came back as the sun went down and the shadow came across the canyon floor like a tide, and she sat nearby and we didn't talk. I slept in pieces, bad dreams and none, the kind of sleep that is more like the body shutting certain rooms to deal with a crisis elsewhere. Her name was Nada. She told me that the second day. I'd asked, because it seemed wrong not to know the name of the person who was keeping me alive, and she'd said it plainly without preamble. Nada. She didn't ask mine. I gave it anyway, Callum Voss, and she repeated it once quietly, as if checking its weight, and that was all. She had food, dried meat that had been packed in something I didn't recognize and didn't ask about, and a flat bread she made the second evening in a small coal bed that barely showed a glow, pressed between 2 stones. She brought me water from the seep. She changed the packing on my wound twice that day, and each time she checked the edges of it with those level, thorough hands, and each time said nothing, which I chose to interpret as a good sign. I was not company. I was feverish by the second afternoon, and I lay on the blanket she'd spread from her own kit, and I alternated between sweating and being cold in a way that had its own particular misery, and I said things I don't fully remember, and she was there. That's the whole of it, she was there. Not hovering, not wringing her hands, not asking me questions I couldn't answer. Just there nearby, doing the things that needed doing, checking me when she needed to check me, letting me be when being was enough. Once I said something that must have been nonsense, some fever talk about the deed, about the water rights, and she said calmly, "Be still. You are not losing anything today." And somehow that was exactly the thing to say, because it was the whole of what I was afraid of, not dying particularly, but losing what I'd built, losing it without having given it to anyone, without it having mattered to anyone but me. And her saying it like it was a simple fact, like it was already decided, it let me let go of it long enough to sleep. The fever broke on the morning of the third day. I know it broke because I woke up sweating the last of it out, and the light was clean, and the smell of sage was clean, and I could hear wind in the rocks, and everything had that quiet, specific quality that comes after sickness passes, where the world looks more like itself than it did before, sharper, more serious, more worth attending to. She was sitting 10 feet away eating the flat bread and watching the canyon entrance. She had a bow across her knees. Not a rifle, a bow. It was old, but it was taken care of, and she sat with it the way I sat with my Winchester when I was keeping watch, not tense, just ready, the readiness so built in it didn't show. "Morning," I said. She looked over at me. "You're better." "I think so. The wound is clean, you'll keep the arm." I hadn't actually been sure of that. I'd suspected it might go the other way. "Thank you," I said. She looked at me for a moment longer than felt like a simple acknowledgement, and then she looked back at the canyon. "The two men left yesterday," she said. "I followed them to the East Passage and watched them go through. They give up. One of them is frightened of this country. He kept looking at the walls." She paused. "The other one is not frightened. He will come back with more men." "I know," I said. She was quiet again. I sat up carefully, feeling all of it, the wound stiff and deep sore but contained, my back aching from the ground, my mouth tasting like 3 days of fever and dust. I looked around at the camp she'd made, the organized small camp, the horses at ease, the way everything had a place. It was the camp of someone who had been taking care of themselves in rough country for a long time. "Where are you headed?" I said. "North," she said it without elaborating. "North is a ways. Where did you come from?" A pause, and in the pause I heard that the question had edges I hadn't intended. She said, "From where I used to live." I left it there. We stayed another half day. She said I needed to eat and rest before I rode, and she was right, and I was not in the habit of arguing with right. I ate. I rested. I watched her move around the camp, and I thought about the specific quality of competence, how it looks different in different people, how some people's competence is loud, and how some people's competence is just what they do, just the way they are in the world, unremarkable to them because it has never occurred to them to be anything else. She was the second kind. In the afternoon she showed me how she'd repacked my saddlebags, rearranging things so the weight sat better on the horse, and she showed me the pack she'd put together for me from what she could spare. Some dried meat, the flat bread, the cloth for changing my bandage. She showed me the route north, which she drew in the dirt with a stick, marking the water sources and the passes and the places to avoid. Her knowledge of that country was total and specific, the way an old rancher knows his own acres, the kind of knowledge that doesn't come from reading a thing, that comes from walking a thing, sleeping on it, sitting still in it for long enough that it tells you things. When she finished, she looked at the map in the dirt and she said, 2 days if you don't push. 3 if you're careful. What happens at the end of it? I said. A town, smaller than whatever you came from, but there are people who won't ask you questions you don't want to answer. I looked at her. You've spent some time near that town. She looked up from the map. Some time, she said. I nodded. Then I said, how long have you been traveling alone? A long pause. She smoothed the map in the dirt with the side of her hand, erasing it. Since the winter before last, she said. I didn't ask what had happened in the winter before last. You don't, when someone says something like that in that tone. You just let the weight of it stand there and you respect it. I'm sorry, I said. She looked at me with those level, clear eyes. Yes, she said. I know. We got moving in the late afternoon, while there was still good light but the worst of the heat had lifted. She came with me. She said the route she'd drawn went her direction partway, and she would ride with me until it split, which made sense, and I didn't argue. I was grateful, though I didn't say it again. I'd said thank you that morning, and she'd received it plainly, without diminishing it or inflating it, just received it, and that felt like enough. Riding with her was easy. She had a way of being quiet that wasn't uncomfortable, not the silence of people who have run out of things to say, or who are wary of each other, but the silence of two people who are paying attention to the same things. The light on the rock. The way the canyon widened and the grass came back. A hawk riding a thermal above the east wall. Not hunting, just riding, the way you do when you're in the right place and there's no particular reason to be anywhere else. About 2 hours, and I said, why were you watching those men? She thought about it. Because men moving like that through that country are dangerous or in danger. Both are my business. Your business, I said. The country is mine, she said. Not possessive exactly. More like a statement of responsibility. What happens in it is my concern. You can't be in all of it at once. No, she agreed, but I was in that part. I looked at her riding easy on her paint horse, the evening light coming orange off the rock walls and catching the side of her face. She was watching the trail ahead with the same focused calm she'd had the whole time, the bow slung across her back now, her hands loose on the rope rein. You knew there was a chance those men were tracking me before you found me, I said. Yes. That's a risk you took, coming into it. She glanced at me then briefly. You think I made the wrong decision. I think it's one I didn't earn. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, a man lying in the dirt alone in my country, what would be the correct thing to do? Ride past him. Most people would. I'm not most people, she said, flat, final, not proud of it, just stating it, the way you'd state that the sky was that particular shade of orange. It was right then. I thought about that for a while. We rode down into a shallow wash and up out of it, and the trail bent around a spine of rock and opened into a wider space, the canyon walls pulling back, more sky above. A jackrabbit startled from a clump of dry brush and went in 3 long bounds into a crack in the rock and was gone. You said the country is yours, I said. You were pushed off it. I was, she said. And you came back. Parts of it, she said, the parts that are left. There was something in how she said that, not anger, not grief, something more like a slow reckoning, the way a man talks about a loss that's old enough to have become fact. It's gone, and I know it's gone, and I know what it was, and I carry both things. I understand that, I said. She looked at me. Your land. Working on keeping it. The men with the deed. Yes. You'll go back for it. It wasn't a question. I turned it over before I answered. I'll go back for it, I said. She nodded. That's all. Just nodded like she'd filed it under the right heading and we could move on. We camped that night in the open, which felt exposed after the canyon, but she said the men would have made for the main road, and the main road was 2 ridges east, so the open was fine. She made a small fire this time. The land was wide enough that the light wouldn't carry wrong. She made the flat bread again, and I contributed what was left of the coffee I'd had in my saddlebag. which wasn't much but was enough for 2 cups, and we sat by that small fire in the high desert dark and drank coffee and said very little. And the stars were what stars are in that kind of country, not decoration, not backdrop, just vast and indifferent and somehow comforting in their vastness, because a sky that big doesn't care about the particular troubles of particular men. And there's a rest in that. She told me later, not that night, the next morning, while we were saddling up, something about her husband. She didn't tell it straight. She told it the way people tell things that are not finished yet, that have not become story yet, that are still too close to be anything but pieces. He had been a man the others listened to. He had been careful and he had been fair, and he had died not in fighting, but in the way men sometimes died, in the in-between, in the place between what was and what was supposed to come, where no one was keeping anyone safe. She had buried him in the winter before last, in ground that was frozen so hard she'd had to build a fire on it first to break the surface, and she had done it alone. She said that last part without any particular weight, and it landed with all the weight in the world. I saddled my horse. I didn't say anything for a while, because there was nothing right to say, and I'd learned long ago that nothing is sometimes more respectful than something. Then I said, "He was lucky to have been seen by you." She stopped what she was doing. She had her hand on the paint's mane and she was looking at the ground, and then she looked up at me. "That's a strange thing to say," she said, not unkindly. "Probably," I said. "I mean it, though." She held my eyes for a moment. Hers were dark and direct, and they were doing that measuring thing they did, the thing I'd noticed when she'd first found me lying in the dirt, taking a reading, coming to a conclusion. Then she turned back to her horse and said quietly, "He would have said the same to me." We rode. The country changed as the day went on. Less canyon, more open plateau, the land going flat and long, the grass coming back in rough bunches between the rock. Hawks everywhere up here. She named them as we passed, not for me, just the way she named things in her own language under her breath, small acknowledgments, the way you'd nod at a neighbor on a road. Around midday, we came to the split she'd talked about. The trail branched, a clear branch, one going northwest along the plateau edge, one dropping down toward the greener country I could see in the far distance where the land broke into something softer. "There," she said, stopping. She pointed down the southeast fork. "Follow that down, 2 hours and you'll find the road. Another hour and you'll see the town from the road." I looked where she was pointing. Then I looked at her. She was sitting her paint horse very straight in the midday light, her dark hair catching it, her face composed and settled into whatever she'd decided. "You're going north," I said. "Yes." "Anything north?" "People I know," she said. "People who know the country." "That's something." "Yes." I should have said goodbye and started down that trail. That was the next thing. I sat there for a moment instead, and she sat there, and we looked at each other in that clear high country light. And I thought about the 3 days, about the bullet coming out and the fever and the food she'd given me, and the route she'd mapped in the dirt and erased, and the coffee, and the way she'd said I'm not most people, and the weight of what she'd carried alone in the frozen ground. And I thought about the deed in my saddlebag and what it would take to hold on to it, and I thought about her going north. And I thought about a number of things that had no particular order and no particular resolution. I said, "The town at the end of that trail. You said you've spent time there. Some people there know you. Some of them. Safe for you." She tilted her head, a considering tilt. "Safe enough," she said. I nodded. I looked down the trail. I looked back at her. I said, "I've got a quarter section about 3 days' ride from that town. Good water, grass that comes back. I'm going to hold it or I'm going to die holding it." I stopped. "I'm not asking anything. I just want to say it." She looked at me for a long time. The wind moved her hair. Somewhere off to the east a hawk made its thin sound in the sky. "You're not asking anything," she said, half question, half not. "Not yet," I said. "Not today." Something shifted in her face. Not a smile exactly, not quite that. Something earlier than a smile. The thing that comes before a smile, when a person is deciding whether the thing deserves one. Callum Voss, she said. Yes. You are a strange man to nearly die in a canyon. I've been told stranger things about myself. I believe that, she said, and that time it was a smile, small and real, the kind of smile that doesn't perform itself, that just arrives because something was actually funny and there was no reason not to acknowledge it. Then she said, "Go get your land." I nodded. I turned my horse toward the South Fork and I started down, and I heard her behind me start north, and I didn't look back. Not because there was nothing to look back at, because some things you carry better when you're looking forward. I got to the town. It was small, she'd said it would be, a main street with 6 buildings on it, and a livery at one end and a well at the other, and a woman out front of what appeared to be a boarding house watching me ride in with an expression that said I looked exactly as rough as I was. I got a room. I got a bath. I got the wound looked at by a man who said he was near enough a doctor and confirmed it was clean and would hold. I slept for about 14 hours. Then I got up and I got to work. What happened in the next 2 months is a story of its own, and most of it isn't pretty, and I won't tell all of it now. The short of it is, there were men who wanted that deed and there were men who didn't want them to have it, and there was a town that had opinions about both, and I was neither the strongest hand in the game nor the weakest. And the thing I had that some of the others didn't was that I knew what I was willing to lose and I knew what I wasn't. The man who'd shot me, I'll call him what he was, which was a land agent acting on behalf of men further east who collected land the way other men collected coin. He sent 2 more men. I was ready for that. The man himself came, eventually, in person, with papers that he claimed superseded mine, and a lawyer who looked like he'd been hired specifically for the look of the thing. That took longer to deal with. It required patience, and it required some assistance from people in the town who had their own reasons to want him gone, and in the end it required me standing in a street and being the kind of man who would stand in a street, which is a specific kind of man, and I will not say whether I entirely liked being that man, but I was that man. He left. The deed held. I went back to the land in the early spring, the grass coming in like it always did, the water where it always was. The cabin needed work, no one had been in it all winter, and I did the work, and I did it alone, which was fine. I had been alone before. About 6 weeks after I got back to the land, in a morning in late spring, when the country was as good as it gets, and the light came sideways across the plateau in that particular way that makes everything look like it was made on purpose. I heard a horse. I was at the water, filling a bucket, not armed, which was careless of me, and I knew it even as I turned. But the paint horse coming down the low ridge to the east had a rider I recognized before I could see her face, recognized by the way she sat it, by the rope rein, by the angle of her head watching the land she was crossing. She rode down to the water and stopped. She looked at me, I looked at her, neither of us said anything for a moment. Then she said, "You got your land." I got my land. She looked around at the cabin, at the grass, at the creek line running clear in the morning light, at the hills to the west and the wide sky above them. She took it in the way she took everything in, slowly, completely, with that unhurried seriousness. Then she looked back at me. "You said not yet," she said, "not today." "I did," I said. "It's not that day anymore." My throat went tight in a way I didn't expect, and I covered it by setting the bucket down and straightening up, taking my time. "No," I said, "it's not." She sat her horse for a moment longer, one hand loose on the rope rein, watching me with those clear and particular eyes. Then she swung down. She handed me the rope rein. She walked to the water and crouched beside it and drank from her hand, then washed her face, and stood up and looked at the land again. "The grass is good," she said. It comes back every year, I said, even dry years. She nodded. She turned around and she was closer than I'd expected, or maybe I'd moved without meaning to, and she put one hand flat on my chest, the same way she had in the canyon, the same measuring, steady placement. Not soft, not asking permission, just placed there, sure and direct, like a thing she'd decided and was now doing. I put my hand over hers. We stood there by the water in the spring morning light, the two horses drinking behind us, the creek running its small clear sound over rock, and I felt her look at me the way you want to be looked at, not past you, not around you, not at what you might become. At you, at the thing you are, plain and known and found sufficient. She said, "Callum." "Yes. I came a long way." "You did," I said. "I know you did." She took one breath, long and settling, the breath of someone who has been moving for a while and has now stopped. And then she said, quiet as the water, "I think I'm home." I couldn't answer that for a moment. There was something happening in my chest that I had not felt in a very long time, a warmth that had nothing to do with sentiment and everything to do with being seen, being found, in a place you'd thought you'd have to hold alone, by someone who chose to be there and meant it. And you knew she meant it because you knew her, because you'd seen what she did when she meant things. "Yes," I said, "I think maybe you are." Later that day, she helped me fix the gate on the near corral, the one that had been sitting off its lower hinge since the fall. She held it while I worked the pin back through, and when it swung right, she nodded once as if she'd expected nothing else. The two horses were in the corral together by then, her paint and my gray, and the gray had stopped minding the paint being there, had stopped flicking his ears in that particular agitated way, had gone calm and content. The way horses go when they've decided the thing beside them is not a threat and is possibly a benefit, and there's no need to make any more decisions about it. I watched them for a while. Nada was beside me, her shoulder near mine, looking at the same thing. "Gray's settling," I said. "Yes," she said. The sun was going down in the west, going down the way it goes down in that country, not sliding behind a cloud or getting soft or making any apologies, just going down steady and full and burning, the sky all that impossible orange, the hills going dark at their bases, the grass lit up gold where the light caught it. I thought of her crouching beside me in the canyon with her instruments and her green-smelling medicine and her complete and unperformative calm. I thought of her sitting watch with the bow across her knees. I thought of her saying, "Be still, you are not losing anything today." I thought of the thing she'd been carrying since the winter before last, the weight of it, the way she'd said it. He died in the in-between, and she had buried him in frozen ground alone. I thought of what it takes to carry that and still move north, still come through a canyon and stop when you find a man in the dirt and decide, without theater, to do the right thing. A woman like that doesn't just happen. She's built by her life, everything she's come through, and she carries all of it with her, and she offers it to you plainly, with her eyes open, choosing, no illusion about what she's choosing into. I said, "There's a lot of work to do here." "I know," she said, no hesitation. "Hard winters." "I've had hard winters." "The men might come back, the land agent, men like him." She looked at me then, straight and easy. "Then we'll stand in the street." I looked at her looking at me, the last of the sun on her face, the horses settled in the corral behind her, the whole of that valley going quiet in the cooling air. "Yes," I said, "we will." That was near 30 years ago now. The land held, expanded, even in time bought the section to the north when the man who'd had it couldn't hold it through a bad drought, paid fair for it, gave him a horse to get where he was going. Good water rights on the north section too. The grass comes back every year. Nada knows this country better than I do still. She walks it in the morning sometimes, early, just walks, and she'll come back with information I wouldn't have thought to collect, where the creek is shifting its bed, which slope is holding its grass better than usual, where the deer are running. I've learned to listen to that information. It has not once been wrong. The men came back twice. The first time I was ready, and the second time I was more ready than the first time, and after the second time they stopped coming. There are men like that. They will test what's in front of them until it costs more than it gains, and then they find something else to test. You just have to be the thing that costs enough. Nada stood in the street both times. Not with a gun, she had her own ways of standing in a street, and they were, if anything, more effective. The land agent's lawyer the second time around looked at her once and found somewhere else to look. I don't know exactly what he saw, but I have some thoughts. I've seen enough of it directed at me over the years, that clear, direct, unhurrying regard of hers, to have some thoughts. I think about the canyon sometimes. The red dirt and the tin-colored sky and the weight of what I hadn't given up yet without knowing I hadn't given it up. The specific smell of that particular place, the sound the creek made, the shape of the rock wall. The way she came around that boulder leading her horse and stopped when she saw me. She didn't have to stop. She didn't have to make any decision at all except to keep going north and let the man in the dirt be the man in the dirt. No one would have known. There was no audience. That's the thing about people like Nada. There's never an audience required. She does the right thing because the right thing requires doing, and she's the one who's there to do it, and that's the beginning and end of the calculation. She saw something in me that day that I could not see from where I was lying. She saw a man worth the effort, worth the bullet coming out and the fever watched over and the route mapped in the dirt, worth the long way north and then the long way back south again, and the gate pin and the winter and the standing in the street. There are men who spend their whole lives waiting to be seen like that, waiting for someone to look at them plain and say, yes, that's worth something, that's worth my time, that's worth my choosing. I was one of those men. I didn't know it until she found me. Some mornings I sit on the porch before the work starts, before the light is all the way up, just the gray coming in over the eastern hills and the smell of the night cold still on everything. And she comes out sometimes with 2 cups of coffee, real coffee now, proper coffee, a luxury I have never gotten past being grateful for, and she hands me one and she sits in the other chair. We don't talk much in those mornings, we never have, there's no need. The land is there, the water is there, the horses are moving in the corral, everything is where it should be, and she chose this, she's here because she chose it. Every morning of every year she has chosen it, and I feel that, I feel the weight of it in the good way, the way that steadies a man down through his boots into the ground. The grass was gold this morning, the light came off the creek the way it does. She was beside me. That's the whole story, that's all there is. A man was dying in a canyon, and a woman stopped when she didn't have to stop, and she brought him back. And 30 years on he is still here and she is still beside him, and the grass still comes back every spring. That's enough, that's more than enough. That's everything.